Hi Iskra and Jalamba. Well, as you can see, Babcha's a bit dressed up, and that's because I'm going to read a book about Fancy Nancy. And I thought I should get fancy as well. As you can see, I have my special hat, my jewellery, and this is the book from the Dianella Library. And your mum knows about the Dianella Library because she and Auntie Mishy, they used to go there and do some homework stuff. So Fancy Nancy, as you know, loves to be fancy. And Ted has his fancy crown on too, so we're all very fancy. Fancy Nancy. And as you know, Fancy Nancy has her bedroom with all her different things, and this is my room before I made it fancy. Okay. And this is her room after she made it fancy. She loves feathers and hats and pictures and lights and flowers and all sorts of things. I love being fancy. My favourite colour is fuchsia. That's a fancy way of saying purple. I like to write my name with a pen that has a plume. That's a fancy way of saying feather. And I can't wait to learn French because everything in French sounds fancy. Très bien. Je parle français. That means I speak French. That's Babcha. Nobody in my family is fancy at all. They never even ask for sprinkles. So when they go for ice cream, you can see Fancy Nancy's dressed up. Her little sister and her mum and dad are not very fancy at all, are they? There's a lot they don't understand. Lace trim socks do help me to play football better. Sandwiches definitely taste better when you stick in frilly toothpicks. So even her food has to be fancy. And a princess is supposed to keep her tiara on. So her little sister probably doesn't keep it on very often. What's a fancy girl to do? I asked my doll Marabella. Her full name is Marabella Lavinia Chandelier. Wow, that is fancy. Then I get an idea that is stupendous. That's a fancy word for great. So she's looking at the notice board at the shopping centre, all the different things to do. Ballroom dancing. Maybe I can teach my family how to be fancy. I make an advert and stick it on the fridge. Learn to be fancy with lessons from Nancy. Start today. Easy, fun and free. Wow. Plain is yellow, fancy is gold. Plain is leather, fancy is patent leather, that's a shiny one. Plain is glasses, fancy is sunglasses. Soon there is a knock on my door. My family saw the advert. They want to get fancy right away. So she's got all the fancy stuff ready for her family, and her dad's come with a notebook. And her mum has even bought in a fancy pen. The trouble is my family doesn't own any fancy clothes. Oh my gosh, does that sound like Daddy Paddy? That's okay. I go and find, what is the fancy word? Oh yes, some accessories. And accessories are all the things like beads and baubles and hair stuff and bags and bows and silk flowers and Christmas ornaments. I think, Nat Iskra, you've been pretty good at using accessories, haven't you? May I escort you lovely ladies outside? The limousine is waiting. And I missed a page. Ooh la la, my family is posh. That's a fancy word for fancy. My mum twirls in front of the mirror. Why don't we go somewhere fancy tonight? So they're all dressed up with their feathers and their boas and their lovely bags and bracelets. And look at Mama's fancy shoes. Even Dad looks pretty fancy. How about dinner at the King's Crown, Dad suggests. Wow, my parents are acting fancier already. May I escort you lovely ladies outside? The limousine is waiting. My dad is our chauffeur. That's a fancy word for driver. When we arrive at the King's Crown, that's a restaurant, everyone looks up. They probably think we're movie stars, and look at how fancy they are, even with sunglasses. And everyone at the King's Crown are eating pizzas and thinking, wow. My fancy hat's falling a bit. Okay, I think I missed a page again. I am so proud of my whole family. They eat with their pinkies up and call each other darling, because if you say darling a lot, that's like you're fancy, and if you drink your tea with your pinky up or eat your pizza, you might look fancy. You'll have to try that next time. For dessert, let's have parfait, my mum says. That's French for ice cream sundae. When our parfaits are ready, I curtsy and say merci, which is French for thank you, and my hat's falling off, so we'll just push it in a bit more. I think my hair's a bit too fluffy. Amazing, my mother knows French as well. I carry the tray like a fancy waiter. Oops, I trip, I slip. The tray does a double flip. Oh no, that beautiful tray of parfaits. I don't feel fancy anymore. I want to go home. Because all the ice cream and all the parfait is on her dress. Poor old Nancy, she doesn't look very happy there. After I get cleaned up, this is at home, I put on my peignoir. That's a fancy French word for dressing gown. I feel much better. I'm ready for parfait. I tell my parents, thank you for being fancy tonight. So Mum's made some beautiful parfaits, which is ice cream with chocolate sauce and gooey ice cream and sprinkles. Love you, my dad says. I love you, my mum says. And all I say back is, I love you, because there isn't a fancy way of saying that. So that's the book from the library, and I know that you have some other fancy Nancy books, Iskra, so now you'll be able to go and read them. And here's Pop coming to switch off before my hat falls completely off.
Bye.
Bye. Love you guys.